There comes a moment when you finally stop running after someone who was never truly running toward you. And in that moment, something inside you shifts, quietly, almost invisibly, yet the entire dynamic between you and him begins to change. It isn't punishment, it isn't pride. It's the silent return of your own center. As Carl Jung said, what you withdraw from, withdraws from you, and what you step into, steps into you. And now, without forcing it, you are stepping back into yourself. Take a slow breath. Let your chest rise. Because when you stop chasing, the world doesn't collapse, it rearranges. The energy between you and him becomes clearer, sharper, more honest. Suddenly, the man who thought he had endless access to you begins to feel a shift, a subtle loss of ground. Something that once felt guaranteed becomes uncertain. And uncertainty awakens instinct. You've spent so long giving, offering, reaching, hoping he would finally meet you halfway. You believe that devotion would inspire devotion, that loyalty would spark clarity. But devotion without reciprocity becomes self-erasure, and your soul has finally grown tired of disappearing. This is not rejection. This is awakening. And the moment you pull back, something ancient stirs in him. Jung believed that every relationship activates archetypes, and here, you awaken one of the most powerful, the pursuit instinct. A man feels it not in his mind, but in the oldest place of his nature, the place that recognizes value only when it must move toward it, not when it passively receives it. Your silence becomes a mirror. Your absence becomes weight. Your distance becomes definition. And as you step back, you don't lose him, you reveal him. Because when you stop chasing, you finally see who is willing to walk toward you. When you step back, something surprising happens. The noise of his indifference fades, and in its place appears a clarity you didn't expect. You begin to feel yourself again, your pulse, your worth, your boundaries. And he feels it too, even if he doesn't say a word. Men sense distance not through explanations, but through absence. It unsettles them in a way they rarely admit. Suddenly, he feels the space you once filled so easily, and he realizes that what he took for granted is no longer guaranteed. In Jung's view, the psyche reacts instantly when something essential is withdrawn. And here, the essential thing is you. Not your messages, not your effort, not your constant presence, you. The woman who cared, the woman who tried, the woman who hoped. When she steps back, a man feels the shift like a cold breeze entering a warm room. He may not understand it logically, but emotionally, instinctively, he knows something has changed. He starts to replay your last conversations. He thinks about the tiny pauses in your tone, the calmer replies, the way you no longer rush in to soothe his doubts or fill his silence. You're no longer leaning forward. You're simply standing still. And this stillness holds power he never expected. Because now, for the first time, he must make a choice. Not the lazy, half-hearted kind he made when he knew you'd always stay, but a real choice. One that requires movement, initiative, intention. A man cannot pursue when you do the pursuing. But when you step back, you give him the space to feel his own desire, his own fear, his own longing. And this is where everything starts to unfold. Men don't chase because they are told to chase. They chase because they feel the absence of what once held them. They chase because the emotional world that was once effortless suddenly feels fragile. They chase because losing you becomes more real than keeping you for granted. Your withdrawal is not a tactic. It is truth. A truth that says, I will no longer walk for both of us. And when he feels that truth, his pursuit instinct awakens, not as a game, but as recognition. Recognition of value. Recognition of loss. Recognition of the woman whose presence used to feel effortless until it was gone. There is a moment, subtle, almost invisible, when he realizes that the version of you who once reached for him is gone. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of truth. And truth has a way of changing everything without raising its voice. Once your energy stops flowing toward him, he feels an emptiness he cannot name. Something in his world becomes less steady, less predictable, and men notice instability far more deeply than they let on. Your absence becomes a quiet teacher. It shows him the difference between your presence and the illusion he created that you would always remain. Jung wrote that the psyche awakens when confronted with loss, because loss touches the unconscious more deeply than gain ever will. And now he is touching that depth, the soft ache of realizing that what once felt effortless is slipping through his fingers. He starts to question himself in ways he never did before. Why isn't she reaching out? Did she stop caring? Did I misread everything? He replays moments, searches for signs, tries to remember when your enthusiasm dimmed. And for the first time, he is the one feeling unsteady, unsure, longing for reassurance that is no longer his to claim. But this shift is not about punishing him. It's about restoring you. Because as you pull back, you begin to reclaim what you once surrendered. Your time, your emotional space, your softness, your inner stability. You start hearing your own voice again, not the one shaped by his inconsistency. You begin to return to yourself, to the woman who existed long before he entered your world, a woman who deserved reciprocity, not exhaustion. And here is the irony. The more you return to yourself, the more he is drawn back toward you. Not because you forced anything, but because you stopped feeding a connection he contributed nothing to. And this creates a magnetic shift, something Jung might describe as the psyche correcting its imbalance, pulling energy away from what drains you so it can return to what strengthens you. This is where his pursuit truly begins, not from desire alone, but from realization. Realization of how deeply your presence once held him. Realization of how different the world feels when you are no longer chasing. Realization that if he wants you now, he will have to move. Something shifts inside him when your energy no longer reaches for his. It's quiet, almost imperceptible at first, like a distant echo he can't yet name. But he feels it. Men always feel when the emotional current that once flowed toward them begins to recede. It unsettles them. Not because they lose control, but because they lose certainty, and certainty is what their comfort rests on. Your distance becomes a question he cannot answer easily. For so long he believed he had all the time in the world, that your heart would wait, that your patience was infinite, that you were the constant in the relationship while he was allowed to drift. But when you pull back, you break that pattern without warning. You stop being the emotional anchor he relied on, and suddenly he is left floating in the quiet space you used to fill. Jung often reminded us that what a man avoids in himself, he chases in others. And now that you've stepped back, he must face something he's been avoiding: his own passivity, his own hesitation, his own fear of stepping forward. You didn't expose it with words, your silence did that. Your stillness forces him to see himself without the comfort of your devotion softening the edges. And that's when the pursuit instinct awakens. Not the superficial chase for validation, not the impulsive desire for attention, but the deeper, more primal movement toward what is meaningful. When a man senses that he might lose access to a woman who once cared deeply, his unconscious mind stirs. Something in him tightens. His thoughts become less casual, his interest sharper, his energy more intentional. He begins to check if you viewed his messages, wonders why you haven't responded, feels a slight pressure in his chest when he doesn't see your name light up his phone. This is not imagination. It is the natural shift that occurs when you stop giving him what he assumed would always be there. And here is the truth that quietly rises. A woman's withdrawal reveals a man's reality. It exposes whether he was comfortable or committed, interested or invested, present or merely entertained. Your step back is not a tactic. It's a mirror. And now he stands before it, finally seeing what you saw long before. That effort was never meant to be one-sided, and that losing you would cost him far more than he ever expected. There comes a moment, subtle but undeniable, when he realizes that the emotional landscape has changed. He cannot quite explain it to himself, but he feels the difference in the way you no longer rush to answer, no longer offer softness before it's earned, no longer carry the weight of connection alone. Your silence isn't cold, it's honest. It's the truth he spent a long time ignoring, now returning to him with quiet force. Men often mistake your presence for permanence, believing that the love you offer is something they can return to at their convenience. But when you step back, you interrupt this illusion. Suddenly, he feels the uncertainty that you felt far too many nights, the doubt that you carried quietly, the longing you try to rationalize. And in this reversal, he is confronted with the emotional imbalance he once dismissed as overthinking. As Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And now, your withdrawal brings his unconscious to light. He can no longer hide behind casual excuses or half-hearted intentions. Your absence forces a confrontation with his own behavior. For the first time, he sees how little he offered compared to what he received. And this realization stings, not because you punished him, but because you stopped rescuing him from seeing the truth. He begins to wonder if someone else is occupying your attention, if your heart has softened toward a different presence, if your world is expanding in ways that no longer include him. He feels a spark of jealousy, not because you belong to him, but because he finally understands that he never owned the access he treated as his right. This jealousy is not toxic, it is awakening. It is the discomfort that pushes him toward clarity. It is the emotional pressure that makes him reconsider his past passivity. You have shifted from the woman who reaches to the woman he must reach for. And that transition transforms everything. Your silence becomes gravity. Your distance becomes direction. Your self-respect becomes the standard he must rise to meet. And deep down, he knows this. If he doesn't move now, he will lose you. Not because you are playing hard to get, but because you finally remembered your worth. There is a specific moment, delicate, almost imperceptible, when a man realizes he is no longer the center of your attention. It doesn't happen in a dramatic gesture or a long speech. It happens in the quiet details, the way your replies no longer arrive instantly, the softness in your tone that has become more measured, the calm steadiness in your presence that no longer bends to accommodate him. And this subtle shift unsettles him more than any confrontation ever could. Men understand distance long before they admit it. They feel it in the pauses, in the quiet confidence of a woman who no longer seeks their approval. And this is where the internal tension begins. He senses that the emotional safety he once took for granted is slipping, and suddenly he is forced to ask himself questions he avoided for far too long. Why did she stop trying? Why can't I feel her warmth the way I used to? Why does her silence feel heavier than her words ever did? Jung taught that the loss of what once nourished us awakens the unconscious more deeply than any gain. And now, without meaning to, you have awakened something in him, the awareness of your value. The realization that your love was never an obligation, but a gift he contributed little to while consuming much from. Your withdrawal becomes his mirror. He begins to see the gaps in his effort, the inconsistency he once justified, the emotional laziness he wrapped in excuses. And in that reflection, he realizes something profound. You are no longer emotionally accessible in the way he assumed. You are no longer waiting for him to choose you fully. You have stepped back into yourself, and in doing so, you have stepped out of his shadow. This is the moment when the pursuit instinct fully activates. Not the superficial desire to get you back, but the deeper, more vulnerable recognition that he may actually lose you. So he becomes more attentive. His messages become warmer. His tone becomes more careful. He starts remembering details he once dismissed. He begins to show effort, not because you asked for it, but because the fear of losing you is louder than his comfort ever was. Your step back has changed the dynamic completely, because now he is the one who must move toward you. Not out of ego, not out of panic, but out of the sudden, undeniable truth that your presence was never guaranteed. And now it feels dangerously close to slipping away. There comes a quiet turning point, a moment when he finally understands that your distance is not a game, not a test, not a strategy designed to provoke him. It is truth. It is the natural consequence of your soul returning to itself. And this realization hits him with a weight he did not expect. Because for the first time, he feels the cost of his inaction. Your absence begins to echo in the spaces where your presence once lived. Your laughter that used to warm his days becomes a memory. Your messages that once flowed like a gentle river have slowed to a calm, distant stream. Your attention, once effortless, abundant, alive, has become selective. And a man feels this shift in the deepest part of himself. Jung would call it the awakening of the inner shadow, the part of him that sees what he lost only after the light has moved away. In this shadow, he begins to understand the quiet truth you always knew. Effort is love in action. And what he failed to give now stands before him like a silent consequence. He begins to overthink the smallest details. He notices when you come online. He reads your words twice, searching for warmth that used to be there. He senses the steadiness in you, the steadiness that no longer depends on him. This steadiness is what pulls him closer. Men are not drawn to chaos. They are drawn to the woman who has returned to herself. The woman who is no longer driven by fear of losing him, but by the clarity of not losing herself again. And in that clarity, you become magnetic in a way he cannot ignore. He begins to wonder if someone else is giving you what he didn't. He imagines another man appreciating what he overlooked. He feels a tightening in his chest, not jealousy alone, but recognition. Recognition that you are the kind of woman whose value only becomes brighter when she steps into her own light. And here is the irony. He is not chasing simply because you pulled away. He is chasing because your withdrawal revealed something he never saw. Your essence, your depth, your quiet resilience, your self-worth. And men are instinctively drawn to what they respect. Respect awakens pursuit. Pursuit awakens presence. Presence awakens change. Your distance did not push him away. It woke him up. There is a moment when the balance shifts so subtly that even he doesn't notice it at first. But his body notices. His emotions notice. His instincts notice. The moment your heart stops leaning forward, his begins to lean in. It is almost poetic how nature corrects imbalance without asking permission. You stop chasing, and suddenly, he feels the unmistakable pull to move toward you. He senses something he cannot name, a quiet change in your energy. You're not angry. You're not dramatic. You're not demanding. You are simply no longer centered on him. And that is what startles him most. Because men are far more attuned to energetic shifts than they ever admit. They feel when the emotional air becomes thinner. They feel when your warmth becomes reserved. They feel when your world no longer orbits them. Jung said that what we withdraw our energy from begins to lose its power over us. And he feels this withdrawal instantly, like a subtle drop in the temperature of your presence. Your conversations become lighter, calmer, freer. Your smiles are no longer reactions to him, but reflections of yourself. Your time is no longer something he can enter without effort. It now requires intention. This calm independence unsettles him in the most revealing way. It forces him to confront a truth he avoided. He was comfortable, not committed. And comfort begins to crumble the moment a woman chooses herself. He starts checking your profile more often. He lingers on your photos. He rereads old messages to feel what he once overlooked. He wonders who now receives the energy you once gave him so generously. But the most powerful shift is internal. He begins to feel respect. Not the shallow kind, but the deep, instinctive respect a man feels for a woman who values herself. Because now he sees you not as someone who waits, but as someone who decides. Not as someone who endures, but as someone who chooses. Not as someone who needs him, but as someone who may walk away if she is not met with reciprocity. And this realization moves him in a way your affection never could. This is where the pursuit grows real. Not out of ego, not out of fear, but out of recognition that he is dealing with a woman who knows her worth, and whose presence must be earned, not assumed. The woman who once chased him has disappeared, and the woman who stands before him now is someone he cannot afford to lose. There is a point where his curiosity turns into concern, and his concern quietly transforms into desire. It happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, but with unmistakable emotional gravity. He begins to feel the weight of your absence not as an inconvenience, but as a loss of something he never fully understood while he still had it. That is the paradox of human connection. What we undervalue in presence becomes priceless in distance. Your withdrawal is not loud, yet it resounds inside him. Your silence is not punishing, yet he feels rebuked. Your calm is not cold, yet it chills him into awareness. Jung believed that the soul responds to what is missing more powerfully than to what is present. And now he is responding to the missing pieces of you: your warmth, your attention, your emotional generosity, all the things he once treated as abundant resources. For the first time, he realizes they were not abundant. They were gifts. He starts imagining conversations that never happened. He rehearses what he would say if he reached out again. He feels a tender anxiety when he thinks of you moving on. But most importantly, he begins to understand that the responsibility for reconnecting lies with him now. That the emotional labor you once carried has shifted, and he must step into the space you left behind. This is where the pursuit stops being instinctive and becomes intentional. He wonders what you're thinking. He wonders who you're becoming. He wonders if he still fits into the life you are quietly building without him. This wondering becomes a subtle ache, one that grows sharper each time he realizes you no longer revolve around his inconsistency. And this ache is necessary because it awakens something deeper than desire. It awakens accountability. Your distance shows him a truth he never faced. You were not difficult to love. He was simply too unawake to love you properly. And in this realization, a man begins to evolve. Not for approval, not for reward, but because your self-respect has become the new emotional temperature of the connection, and he knows he must rise to meet it, or be left behind by the woman who finally chose herself. There is a moment, quiet, undeniable, transformative, when he finally understands what your distance truly meant. Not punishment, not games, not manipulation. It was awakening. It was you choosing to no longer carry the emotional weight for both of you. It was you stepping out of the pattern that drained you and stepping back into the truth you had forgotten. You never needed to chase what was meant to meet you halfway. And this realization does something to him. His ego feels the sting, yes, but his heart feels something deeper, the recognition of your worth. Because the woman who stops chasing does not become cold. She becomes clear. She becomes grounded. She becomes the version of herself that no longer trades her softness for crumbs. Jung said that the most powerful transformation happens when a person finally meets themselves. And that is what your pulling back created, not only for you, but for him. He now meets his own reflection, sees the gaps in his presence, the lost opportunities, the care he withheld because he assumed you'd always stay. And he feels it, in the way your silence lingers, in the way your calmness makes him question his choices, in the way your absence forces him to consider the man he has been. This is where the pursuit instinct becomes something more refined, more mature. He is no longer chasing simply to restore what he lost. He is chasing to become someone worthy of being chosen back. And you are no longer the woman who runs toward love with empty hands. You carry yourself with a new steadiness, a fullness that cannot be taken lightly. Your boundaries are no longer negotiable. Your heart is no longer given cheaply. Your presence is no longer automatic. It is earned. He senses this. He respects this. And whether he rises to meet it or fades into the background, you have already transformed. Because the real shift was never about him. It was always about you. You stopped chasing him and started becoming the woman he cannot ignore, the woman he cannot replace, the woman he must pursue with intention or lose forever. And now, before we close this chapter, I want you to breathe deeply and feel what is awakening inside you. If these words reached you, truly reached you, then you are ready for the next step of your own rebirth. So write one word below, awakening. Let me see who felt this journey all the way to the end.